Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Victoria.
Back again for another episode. And this is on a topic that I know is close to your heart as well as mine. You and I have talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility numerous times.
I am very, very passionate. I mean, being a Black man in America in tech, it forces me to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and of all kinds, right? Like things due to accessibility or things that are less talked about, right? We talk about race and gender, but we don't necessarily talk about folks with hearing impairments.
Yeah.
But we just did. We had our EUC summit. Our head of marketing and communications Ed McNamara talked to a deaf Olympian, Brooke Thompson, and she was so impressive, telling us how she learned to reach the Olympics, even with what you might think of as an impairment. She looks at it as her strength.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I found interesting actually at the beginning of the pandemic, and I know I've written on this on LinkedIn and in blog posts, was the fact that when we moved everybody back home, suddenly it actually improved accessibility for a lot of people. It was easier for people with hearing impairments to cope, for example, because they had their own environment that they could manage. It was easier for people with physical disabilities who didn't have to navigate the obstacle courses that we create in our offices. It was easier for people who are neurodiverse because they were in an environment that they could control and manage. And there was also the ability to work remotely more and be more flexible in the way we work was going to really help women in the workplace as well. So there's a huge amount that's changed since then as well. And I think we've kept some of those benefits, but also maybe we've overlooked some of them.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of the time we're not aware of these things. And tech has moved on so much in the last few years as well. And actually, again, second episode that I've had to do this season, I've had to do the interview without you because you were too busy for me. But the conversation I had this time was with Beau Ray, who is a colleague of ours at Stratascale, who is visually impaired. And it was a really interesting discussion about, and one of the things that came out is some of the things that have been developed that we might think of as useful features or interesting features or something that's fun. Actually, for Beau, with his visual impairment, they're really critical for him to be able to work effectively.
Yeah, I can't wait to listen to that interview. I think, me being the head of the employee resource group for the Black Americans within SHI has been one of the most valuable things in my career. To see us being recognized by Newsweek and others, Forbes, I believe, as the best place, the greatest place for workplace diversity, expands beyond race, beyond gender, into some of the things you're going to talk to Beau about in just a few minutes. So I'm really excited to hear about it.
Yeah. And the point you make about it being eye-opening and the point you make about it being more than any one type of diversity, I think what's really important about diversity in the workplace is that we get to talk to people who think differently from us. And that's what really drives creativity, drives innovation, makes life interesting. I mean, you and I were talking earlier about the fact that about some of the things we disagree on.
Tons.
That's what makes life interesting.
It's the spice of life.
So anyway, I had a fascinating discussion with Beau. I'm sorry you weren't able to make it, but I survived without you. And hopefully our listeners will enjoy this interview.
Can't wait to hear it.
Hi, Beau. Thank you so much for joining us today on We Got Your Mac. Scott and I are really excited to talk to you. I know we've had a couple of chats previously, and we wanted you to join us on We Got Your Mac because you've got so many interesting things to talk about when it comes to accessibility and how using Apple products and your Mac is helping you to be successful and have access to a working environment in a way that wouldn't necessarily have been possible in the past.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks for having me. I was actually really, really excited when you guys reached out. As it is, I am a professional nerd, which means I get paid to be a nerd, which is awesome. I'm a dad, and I am currently focused primarily on emerging technologies and innovation, at Stratascale. And when it comes to accessibility and things that help the visually impaired, that does really align with what we're doing with emerging tech. Now, my focus is primarily around cybersecurity, but Stratascale does give me a lot of latitude and a lot of leash to explore whatever I want in the emerging tech realms. And, when it comes to helping the visually impaired connect with technology, which then leads to connecting with the rest of the world, Apple, to me, has done the best with that and helping the visually impaired, approach technology.
You mentioned a little bit about visual impairment. Just can you kind of talk about like what you experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess just a little bit about my impairment, which also affects my daughter too. It's called Stargardt's disease, and it's a form of macular degeneration that is not really like the other forms of MD, where it affects our central vision. So our central acuity is pretty crap for the most part. It involves a lot of blind spots, a lot of flashing, and the upside is we have a lot of our peripheral vision. The problem with that is peripheral vision is not really great when it comes to depth perception and reading and kind of making out faces. So when it comes to how that impairment affects me, it's kind of all over the place. And it's a lot of things that I took for granted before I was diagnosed with it, later on in life. Stargardt's is generally a juvenile form, but for whatever reason, it didn't really start manifesting until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. For my daughter, it started when she was around 8. So her slide from, diagnosis to being told, hey, look, you are now legally blind, was much quicker. It was like a 3-year slide. Whereas for me, I'm still not really considered legally blind, but I am considered visually impaired. And when it comes to work, and especially being in the technology side of the house, like I have to have certain things that let me continue to work efficiently. And that's, it's going to be things that large text to speech, using the zoom features, using the magnifying glass, all those things that normally I would never even thought about.
It seems that technology is generally radically changing the world for people who have impairments of different kind, whether it's visual, whether it's hearing, whether it's mobility.
Here's the funny thing, and I was just thinking about this earlier too, because there's been a lot of talk around the Vision Pro from Apple, and especially within the blind community, there's lots of influencers out there on YouTube who are like, hey, this is actually really cool. They did a good job, apparently, of taking the accessibility options that I'm used to, on my iPad or my iPhone and putting those into that device. That means, cool, like VR and mixed reality might actually be something that I can use now. The sad thing is it really kind of affects how you are as a family. People used to sit around and watch television and, or I guess they still do, like as a family, we'll watch a show or a movie or whatever. When you are visually impaired and everybody else is, I guess, what do you want to call like visually normative? They're seeing it just fine. They're like engaged or laughing or whatever. My daughter and I, like, I'm a little bit better than my daughter. Like I can kind of keep up with everything, but if there's subtitles, I don't. My daughter's kind of left on the outside of that. Like she's there with us, but she's not engaged in the activity with us. I hope one day that, even if it is a wearable device that allows her or, myself, if mine continues to progress, to sit with the rest of the family and enjoy watching a show together, that's a possibility. And it feels like we're getting there.
Yeah, I would love to see, and especially now because Apple has the new feature where personas, if multiple people are using Vision Pro, the persona, rather than being contained to a window, is actually in the room with you.
That
Like
is awesome.
for you and your daughter to be able to use that to have a giant screen
Yeah.
that you can share. You're both looking at the same screen. I mean, I guess if you were next to each other, you could still see each other, but you would see each other with the giant headset on. But if it
Okay.
were personas, you could still see each other in the same room, watching the same big screen. I would be so curious to know how that would work for both of you.
Yeah, that would be super interesting. Because yeah, like that's the next thing, right? Like if you've got this big thing on your head, okay, you're kind of sharing in the activity, but you feel kind of isolated and closed into this, world. But if there's a way that, hey, look, it's kind of like this virtual couch and living room where you're all just sitting and doing, this thing, that would be
Yeah.
great.
It's going to be interesting to see that, and it always works like this, right? There's a limited market for a lot of these features. If they can make them appeal to the geeks who are going to want to adopt them, then that's how these new technologies that are going to have much broader application and are going to make a much bigger impact on people like your daughter than perhaps they do on people like Adam or myself. One of the things we wanted to talk to you about was your journey into that Apple ecosystem and why Apple is now really important to you in terms of allowing you to access the workplace and be as effective as you are, and operate in a working environment that isn't necessarily particularly friendly to people with visual impairment.
I mean, I guess I could say the funny thing, which is, well, I have bought too many apps through Apple, so I'm not changing no matter what, because I'm not spending all that money again on a different platform. But when it comes down to it, early in smartphones, it was pretty much the same time that I started having issues around, my impairment. And I was working for a large telco, and they sent me an Android, and the Android just did not work when it came to accessibility. And it was really hard to keep the font sizes that I needed consistent from app to app. And I think that might be something between everything kind of being open source when it came to Android, or at least early on, and then with Apple, like you can have those arguments about open and closed source. I like Apple because it's consistent. They have a kind of a guideline of this is how you must develop. When it came to the Apple devices and the early, accessibility options that I could access from app to app, as long as I stayed within the Apple or their iOS ecosystem, like my fonts stayed the same. I could use every app I needed to use. And the way that the Apple devices interconnect, that's game changing for me, because it means it's less time I have to spend trying to figure out how I do this thing or how I can get it to do this. Everything just kind of connects together. Everything just kind of works.
Yeah, I just, not to toot my own horn, but I just got the new iPad Pro, the 13 inch. And as I was going through setting it up, I forgot that on my previous iPad, they have the setting where you can change the resolution. The font was so tiny. But right there, at least in the news app, right in the top bar, they have very easy settings to increase the font size. And I think that is one of the strengths, even if you go into system settings on any iOS device, despite being able to make the overall resolution smaller, you can set a system-wide font size to make sure that everything is readable on the device. Yeah, I think that's definitely a big strength of those devices.
Yeah, I know a lot of people complain about, Apple's guidelines for developing, and I don't mean to get into a whole development discussion around, Apple and open source, and there are definitely upsides to both. But I think when it comes to usability and customer interaction and even customer adoption to to the apps, I don't have a problem with their strict guidelines, because at least for me, when it comes to, accessibility options and trying to use a device with a visual impairment, it makes it so much easier because everybody's playing and doing from the same playbook.
I think it's very easy for people to forget why those kind of guidelines are put in place, but actually for most of us are not the people who will benefit from them, or maybe we don't see the benefits of them until those guidelines aren't there. Like a lot of things where there are rules, everyone complains about them, and then when the rules aren't there, you suddenly realize where they were. I mean, I know the technology is not perfect yet, but it's clearly making a massive difference to people's lives. It is clearly, in the majority of cases, becoming an enabler. I mean, we do see cases very clearly where the technology is actually the disabler. And I think people are very good at calling that out now and saying, I can do this, but your technology is stopping me.
Your employees love Mac. Its sleek design and intuitive interface make work a breeze. But for you, the IT manager, Mac can feel like a puzzle with missing pieces. Integration headaches, security concerns, the dreaded migration process. Sound familiar? SHI gets it. We're not just another tech vendor. We are your strategic partner in building a Mac-centric workplace that works for everyone. Our complimentary Mac readiness assessment is like an X-ray for your IT environment, revealing the exact steps you need to take for a successful Mac deployment. We'll guide you through security, locking down Mac's built-in defenses so your data stays safe, deployment, streamlining your setup so Macs hit the ground running, integration, making sure Mac plays nice with your existing systems, migration, moving from old devices to new without losing a beat, and more. We'll tackle any Mac challenges you throw our way. But that's not all. For a limited time, eligible customers who complete the assessment get a free trial of top-tier MDM solutions like Jamf Pro or Conji. It's like a test drive before you buy the car. SHI isn't just about selling you Macs. We're about making Mac work for you. Zero-touch deployment? Check. Effortless integration with your existing MDM? Double check. Empowered, productive Mac users from day one? You bet. Don't just manage Mac. Master it. Discover how SHI's Mac Readiness Assessment can unlock the full potential of your Apple fleet. Contact us today or visit shi.com/Mac assessment. Your Mac Power future starts now. We got your Mac covered.
What are the kind of things, I mean, thinking not just of yourself, but of your daughter and her generation as well, what are the kind of things that you would like technology vendors who are thinking about the future, who are trying to come up with those innovative ideas, what are the kind of things that you would like them to think about that could make a difference to people like you and to people like your daughter?
I think for me, a lot of times I would really just like to be able to select something and then, and that's actually a good thing that, like, at least on my iPhone, like I can have it speak it, but that's usually only in like articles. I would like it if it were just in an app, like those sort of things. And like you said, in the news app, having a way to change fonts inside of an app itself, like the system setting is great. But a lot of times you will have apps that the developers have chosen to override the system setting and they're using their own. And I guess it's for, UI, UX reasons. Like this is the way that they intended it to look. But give me a way to make it so I can actually use, somebody like me could just use it. And it doesn't have to be freely. Like I'm not going to see how awesome it looks. I'm going to I just want the info. So my user experience is probably going to be way different than somebody else's who is, aesthetically, this is awesome and amazing. And this, that, and the other. Like, I don't care. Like, I just need to know what you're trying to tell me.
Yeah. It's something else that actually I thought of when you were talking about text to speech. I don't know how closely you followed the newer AI gadgets like the Humane Pin, or there's I think the Rabbit R1, these devices that it almost seems like they've gotten ahead of themselves with the hardware. Like they don't really know what the point is. But one of the features, because they have cameras built in, is to be able to ask it what is in front of you. And that's something that a lot of the reviewers sort of poke fun at, because for people that don't have an impairment, what's the point? I'm looking at the scene, and it takes a long time for this thing to send up to the cloud and get the answer back, but it will describe, and actually some of the descriptions are pretty impressive. But that is something that for accessibility purposes would be really, really useful to be able to say, like, what is in front of me? Can you talk me through where I am and what is there? That's something that I think a lot of the reviews sort of missed, is the potential of that.
Absolutely. There was one, I think it's The Blind Life, I think is the name of the channel. But he did a review of a pair of wearable glasses that, it may have been like what you're describing, but they had a little camera and it would tell you what's in the room. Like as you looked, it would be a little delayed, but it would be like, desk on the left, television ahead, this on the right, plant on the floor. It helped you kind of know, like, oh, hey, this is what I'm trying to navigate. And I thought that was really awesome.
That reminded me of Facebook Portal, right? Came out just before the pandemic. Everyone was going, what's the point of this? The answer was old people stuck at home, don't know how to use Teams or Zoom or anything. You can give them this thing, they press a button, they can talk to their families. And the sales absolutely went through the roof, because the majority do not see those edge use cases. And I think it's really important that we explore those, that people like you and your daughter, who is going to be living with this for a very long time, are providing their input into what the technologies are that they'll find useful. And yeah, those, we'll find uses for them for mainstream users. They may be seen as a little bit of a bit of fun, bit of a gadget. But for some people, they will be life-changing.
I think companies maybe sometimes miss out that they've got a whole base of customers here when it comes to people in, visual impairment community or the low hearing community, or even, our seniors. Earlier you're like, hey, look, sometimes technology is the inhibitor. And like, we just want things to be easier. And like, that's the whole point of technology. Like, technology is to make things easier for us to get jobs done so we can be more effective and more intelligent human beings without having to fight with our technology to make it do stuff.
It's also interesting to see, what are some of these vendors doing around actually getting input from these communities? So I went to an innovation conference in London last year, and we were actually taken to Google's accessibility lab. And they showed us some really interesting things that they have in that lab, and they work with people with different needs to help them understand how they should be developing their products, because they know that they do not know what it is that people are actually going to find difficult and going to find easy, and what features mean most to them. And I think that's something that we really should be pushing. You should be pushing your emerging tech vendors for. We should be pushing the big tech mega vendors for, is to make sure that they're telling us how they're involving communities with different needs in the development of their products, and they're not just developing for the mainstream.
Yeah, and what's funny too is, just thinking about this, it feels like a lot of the innovation when it comes to accessibility or, integrating features into platforms for people with disabilities is coming outside of the US. So, Canada, there have been several, tech companies that have come out of Canada that are doing things around, accessibility.
What we really need to hope is that a lot of these things that at the moment are seen as edge use cases, we find a way to get them to become part of the mainstream technology, so that if somebody like you, or in the future your daughter, walks into a workplace, they don't have to ask for something special. That the technology that we all get every day is flexible and adaptable enough to allow for different accessibility needs, whether that's for vision, whether that's for hearing, whether it's mobility, whether it's for neurodivergent individuals. We've all got different needs and preferences anyway, but we need to start thinking less about that narrow point where we're all the same, because we're not going to get the innovation if we push everybody to becoming more and more similar, are we?
Right. No.
You know, we need the people who are different, after all, to stop us all thinking the same way and doing things the same way. And the innovation is only going to be driven by communities like the visually impaired community.
Absolutely. And it really just comes down to, I don't know, what do you want to call it? KISS method? Keep it simple, stupid. For people with disabilities or impairment, like, just make it simple. When you have intelligent people putting thought into it, like the Google folks and the Apple folks, and I'm sure, around Microsoft, they're putting thought into that too. And when it comes to AI, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to maybe merge AI with wearables or with devices that can take what impaired people need their devices to do and their technology to do to kind of the next level, like where it kind of starts learning what you need and it starts anticipating what you need. And then there's a whole lot less work involved in trying to figure out, how do I just get my phone to do this one thing that I need it to do?
Well, if they can make my thermostat learn when I want my house warm and when I don't, hopefully they can make your phone work out that this is what you want it to do when you use this app.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Beau. It's been really interesting. I know we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. So thank you so much for joining us on We Got Your Mac. And we wish you and your daughter every success and your future engagements with technology.
Thank you so much. And honestly, thank you guys for being champions and talking about it, because it's not something that always gets a lot of talk. But as we get older, like, even if you don't have a visual impairment or a disability, guess what? You're going to get older and your body falls apart. And then you're going to be one of the ones that's like, man, I really wish I had that Facebook portal so I could just hit one button and make it work, because technology scares me. So I do appreciate it. I appreciate the conversation.
Wow, Victoria, what a great interview with Beau.
Yeah, as you can tell, I was getting quite excited about some of the things that he was talking about. I just, the potential for technology to enable people and to help create a more equal environment for everybody to be able to participate, either not just in the workplace, but actually participate equally in activities socially. It was just amazing.
I don't know why more companies don't develop technologies that enable folks with impairments. I don't know if it's a cost thing, if they're just not aware that this is a need for a large swath of human beings.
I think it's just, probably lack of awareness, because we talked earlier about diversity in the workplace is what drives innovation. If you haven't got people who are saying, hey, that doesn't work for me because, or this might help me, then you're not necessarily focused on it. I think we develop things for the majority and it all becomes very much the same and amorphous. We're not thinking about those edge cases. And actually some of the things, you might develop them for the edge case, but there's definitely mainstream use for them, particularly with an aging population.
It's so true. And it's funny that it's something that Apple doesn't necessarily make a big deal about, but you see how much accessibility is imbued in every one of their products. I have friends that are just Apple users, much like Beau, because the accessibility features are built in. They're easy to find. We got Siri first on Apple devices. And so things like speech to text and increasing, the size of fonts are just, they're second nature on a Mac and in Apple products.
Yeah, I think Beau's point that things like AR and VR headsets and AI are going to hopefully make a difference was a really interesting one. He talked about how his daughter had a device specifically designed for people with visual impairment that helped her to be able to see because it brought everything closer to her eyes. But it'd be interesting to see how something like Vision Pro helps him with his visual impairment by actually bringing things closer to him to bring them to the point where he can see.
That would be interesting to see how Beau adapts to Vision Pro and how it helps him. I have another friend who has one arm, and when he put on Vision Pro and he went to do the setup for the hand tracking, it didn't sort of give him angst that he only had one hand. It knew right away where his hand was supposed to be, and he got very emotional about that aspect. And so it's this surprise and delight that Apple does think about those edge cases, puts it into the product that really makes it accessible for a larger swath of folks.
That's really interesting because there hasn't been anything out there that says, by the way, we don't mind how many hands you have. They talk about the hand tracking.
Imagine if you didn't have.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And actually, I quite liked when at WWDC, they were talking about AirPods and the fact that you can now nod or shake your head and you don't have to speak. The whole thing around haptics and small incremental features that are coming out with new products, new software, be really interesting to see how hopefully they do act as workplace enablers and that they do make the workplace more accessible to
everyone.
Yeah, to everybody, because everybody has something to contribute. And it's really exciting seeing what that might result in.
Yeah. It's magic what Apple does to just put those little features in. They're not little at all. I'm sure that they take a lot of forethought, but the future is bright, I think, for accessibility features. And we'll have to do more on this topic. I think it's not talked about enough.
Definitely. And I know people have talked about, the importance of peripherals to expand the capabilities of devices. So I think within the end user compute environment generally, there's probably a lot more that we can discuss in a later episode. So anyway, great to talk to you again today, Kevin, and
Likewise.
Looking forward to the next one.
I'll talk to you soon, Victoria.